You are listening to Road to CEO, nothing but in-depth interviews with executives about their journeys as CEO. I'm your host, Will Marlow, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Some of the biggest mistakes I've made as CEO or leader is when I've delved even anywhere close to trying to control.
I'm here today with Darrin Clement, the former CEO and founder of Maponics, who successfully exited by selling to multi-billion-dollar tech company Pitney Bowes. We're here to talk about his journey in business, what led him to be CEO, and what he learned along the way. Darrin, thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the Road to CEO.
Thanks, Will. It's great to be here.
So let's start at the beginning. Tell us about Maponics. What type of company was it?
Well, it started as, I guess you might call it just a pure mapping company. So the initial business plan was that we would create maps for companies, businesses, to help them with their sales and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, direct mail was still a big deal. And so figuring out how to create maps of zip codes, maps of sales territories, maps of these things called carrier routes. It was too much expense for businesses to invest in all that infrastructure themselves, so they outsourced it to us. As you could tell from the way I stated that didn't stay our business model for long. So just giving you the treetops here, we changed our business model and started to provide mapping data that allowed companies, much bigger companies, to do analytics themselves. And that really is what transformed the company into a success.
What was the general timeline? So when you what year was it when you founded the company?
Founded the company in September of 2001. And that was a rough month for sure, for the least of the issues that was a tough month is for my business. But we stayed with that business model for maybe 4 years.
Okay.
And I'm going to guess, gosh, it's so long ago. I'm going to guess it was around 2005 that we switched business models. It was right around the same time that Google really launched a viable Google Maps.
Okay.
So I think that was around 2005.
Okay, so you founded it 2001. So this is the 20th anniversary of the founding of Maponics.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that. Yeah, we're having this conversation in September. 20 years. Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm obviously older than in my 30s, but like I feel like I'm still in my 30s. How could it have been 20 years ago?
That's amazing.
Oh, wow. Mind-blowing. Yeah.
It really is. So you founded it 20 years ago. 4 to 5 years later, you pivoted. Would you describe that as a pivot when you shifted?
Yeah, I mean, that's what everybody calls it. I didn't go to business school, and I don't like all the business school terms, but people call it pivot. I think I try to avoid that kind of jargon, and I just say we changed our business model.
Yeah. And that was based on, and you highlighted that was when Google produced its first real viable Google Map product. Is that because, now how did that change things for Maponics? Why did that matter?
It didn't matter in the sense that was not a reason that we changed our business model. It was just a big milestone in the mapping world, which is why I kind of had it anchored in my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It did affect us in the long run in very positive ways. I think it's also fortuitous that we changed our business model because it created a perception that maps and custom maps were a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine, again, this is in hindsight. I'll tell you why we changed our business model, but to answer your specific question, Up until then, there was, say, MapQuest, but that was directions. If you wanted to have a custom version of MapQuest, you had to drop $100,000.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted just a custom map, you could call Maponics, and depending on what you wanted, it might be $50 or it might be $500. But you could create a custom map. When Google created Google Maps, I shouldn't say created because they actually acquired a couple companies, blended some technology, but they had an API that made customizing maps much easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so in hindsight, that would have spelled the death of the initial iteration of Maponics,
Right.
regardless. But the reason we changed, we weren't succeeding. You know, for every dollar of revenue, we had 99 cents of cost. We were doing the custom mapping, but we were doing it manually.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we did a bunch of things to try to automate it. But that automation was the difference between $1.50 of costs for every dollar of revenue and 99 cents of cost. So we were able to be just a hair profitable, but it wasn't working. And we kept getting requests from companies to create, I guess, what they were calling neighborhood maps.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, well, neighborhood, well, like we'll map out the area for you and we'll put the zip codes on there. And they're like, no, we want to see Chinatown. We want to see where Soho starts and stops. And we're like, no, there's no government agency that defines where those things are. How could we map them? And I'll skip over some of the details, but essentially we had a customer who had done a pilot project on creating neighborhoods for like 5 cities.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning they went in and drew these boundaries of Chinatown, Soho, Hell's Kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
We realized later that it was crap, but we were like, okay, they did it. We could do it.
Mm.
So we worked out a deal with them where we acquired those 5 cities. We built out another 20 cities ourselves. And oh my gosh, the appetite for that data was higher than anything we had ever created. And we said, all right, now we've got to figure out how to pay the bills with our old business model while going full bore on the new business model.
I see. That's fascinating. So talk about funding for a moment. So,
Sure.
when we talk about tech companies, we think of venture capital funding, probably first seed rounds, that sort of thing. How did you fund Maponics?
All self-funded. So the initial start of Maponics back in 2001, I managed to get a contract for some custom mapping before I even started the company. So that was,
Mm-hmm.
For all you guys out there who might be listening who aren't CEOs and you're thinking about starting a company, if you can start a company with a contract in hand, you are 1,000 light years away from the way most people start companies, which is a hope and a dream and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of late nights. So it was a good start. When we changed our business model, it was just looking under the seat cushions for money kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and scraping together and trying to put in some long hours. At that point, I had acquired not acquired, that sounds awful. I had hired someone who was really good on the technical side, and he eventually became a partner.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was doing some of the digitizing. I was doing some of the digitizing, kind of weekend work.
Mm-hmm.
And so we never had to, at that point, entertain outside funding, which was good because I didn't know how to do any of that. I do now, but back then I didn't know how to talk to venture capitalists or angels, or it was a very foreign concept. But we didn't go down that path.
Yeah. I love hearing about companies that are essentially funding out of revenue. I would assume that helps you maintain a large degree of control. Did at any point did you wish you could go out and pull in some growth capital, or were you kind of satisfied sort of looking under, kind of being creative about funding?
We definitely talked about getting outside funding a lot, particularly around that time of the change of business plans. We also had an idea around that time frame for another product. I won't go into too much detail, but another product, and we're like, we can't do all of this.
Right.
If we do all of this, we're going to fail. And so we said, well, we either need to get outside funding or we need to abandon this other product.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, we decided to abandon the product. We talked to a couple of VCs because we were looking at that level of revenue, investing, $1 to $2 million. And we ended up getting a verbal offer from one. And kind of in a weird coincidence that I think was a really good thing, the lead VC had a death in the family, unfortunately, and hit him pretty hard. And he took about 2 weeks where everything was shut down for what he was working on. And during that time, we started having second guesses. And so by the time we got back in touch, we said, don't bother writing up the term sheet. And we never went down the path.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was good because then when it came time to exit, and I'm jumping around a lot in time scope, but when it came time to exit, we didn't have these outside investors to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
We did our exit deal on our terms. I still owned a super majority of the company at that point. And so it was a much simpler process to exit. I couldn't imagine trying to exit with a whole bunch of investors
Mm-hmm.
on our balance sheet. That would not be equity sheet. I would not be where we are today, I don't think, if I had.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean it's a wrong decision for other companies. And since selling my company, I do a lot of angel investing myself, and I certainly expect those companies to be exiting.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to get the idea out there that it's a bad idea in all cases. In my case, it would not have been a good deal.
I see. So you've done two things that I think a lot of CEOs aspire to do. One is you've sold your company and you sold it on your terms, as you said. And the other thing you did is you replaced yourself as CEO before you exited. Can you talk about that? So how did that end up happening? Was that a plan you had all along?
It was an absolute plan, because when it came time that we felt like, okay, we've really built a great company, it's worth something. We started to I'll say soft shop the company. And there were two things that made those deals not go through. One is the valuation wasn't what we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we were like greedy per se, but we were like, well, if that's all we're going to get, let's just keep riding it the way it is. But also, it was clear they wanted me to stick around.
Mm.
So it was going to be the kind of thing where we'd be acquired and I'd be stuck working for the acquirer for a couple years. I was burning out. And I think of myself first and foremost as an entrepreneur, not a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
The thought of being an executive vice president at some billion-dollar company made my skin crawl. Like, there was no way I was going to fit in to that culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of stepped away from that soft shopping of the company with the realization that, okay, we need to set our target at X when we do exit, but we need to replace me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm burning out. So even if we never sell the company, I don't want to be CEO with a couple hundred employees. I don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to be executive vice president at some big company once we do exit. So let's find a replacement. Miraculously, like I say miraculous because I can't imagine anybody out there being as lucky as I was in what I'm about to describe. I will say that I believe intentions matter, and setting the intention that we were going to replace Darrin as CEO was an important first step.
Mm-hmm.
Right around that time, someone that I had worked with, I guess 10 years prior, 15 years prior, at a bigger company in the same space, was coming back from an overseas assignment. He had been overseas for a couple years. He was feeling like he had kind of reached the ceiling at that company because the next level he was never going to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I started talking, and I was like, you know what? Let's just go for it. You come on as president of Maponics for 6 months, and if that all works out, we reverse roles. You become CEO, I become president, and then we sell this company. And it worked. And I think part of the reason it worked was not just that he knew this space, but he was a good guy. Like, is a good guy. I mean, he still is a good guy. Like ethical, hardworking, smart, well-rounded. What I've said to people since, and I've said it to him, is he and I had so similar of a view of the role of leader, of where the company could go. He was just better. He was better than me. And so, and although some of my friends might laugh to hear like me say like I have a big ego, but I also have a real appreciation for people who are better than me, whatever we're talking about, weightlifting or CEOship. He was better. And I gladly turned it over to him because I knew it was in good hands. And in that year or so that he was CEO and I was president, and before we started reshopping the company, he made essentially he did everything I was doing, but just twice as good. And the company's bottom line improved, the infrastructure within the company improved, the management processes within the company improved. And ultimately, when an acquirer did acquire us, one of the things they loved was it was turnkey.
Yeah.
They were able to acquire the company without having to retool everything. So I might be getting ahead of your question, but that's in a nutshell what happened.
No, that's exactly right. I think that was exactly what I was asking, and I can imagine that an acquirer would love that, because if they see that the CEO has been replaced once successfully, in their mind, I'm sure the CEO could be replaced as needed, and
Yep,
that makes it 10 times more attractive.
I think you're right.
Yeah. So, so that does sound, intention aside, I think that does sound lucky, because as we both know, you can hunt for a long time to find the ideal director, VP, CEO. I mean, it just gets harder as you
Yeah.
go. So it sounds like that was a fast process, and there was a a good element of luck in there.
Yes, for sure.
Great. So let's back up for a minute. Did you always want to be CEO? Did you always know that that your skin would crawl working at a big company?
Um, I always knew the latter. Like I always knew. So my first exposure to big company was summer interns during college at IBM. So my background was in physics, and the amount of waste, the amount of bureaucracy, the whole thing of 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. I saw that at IBM, and I was just like, no way am I ever going to be part of that. But I'd always had that entrepreneurial streak, as a kid, as a high schooler, um, and so I always knew I was going to be starting my company and running my company. I never liked the term CEO, and I only even adopted it at Maponics once we got to a certain size, and it seemed like our customers expected me to have that title. Um, I always preferred the title of founder. It just felt that's what fits me,
Yeah.
and I don't have any other real successes to point to. But anytime I've been starting a company has really been when I feel right. Um, and with that, a certain amount of leadership, but not leadership in terms of controlling others. Some of the biggest mistakes I've made as CEO or leader is when I've delved even anywhere close to trying to control. That's not my style. My style is much more um, create the vision, do a lot of the work, and get like-minded people around me.
Mm-hmm.
And then once something's working 80 to 90%, turn it over to somebody else to really fine tune it. And I had actually been applying that concept throughout the company and throughout other companies. And I'm just realizing as I'm saying that that's exactly what I did with replacing myself as CEO. I got to the company to a point where it was, 80 to 90%. And then when Dan Adams came in as CEO, he was able to take it to that next level. But I approached that with everything. The programs I would write in the early days, the sales function that I would do. I'm very good at getting things to 80 to 90%. And I'm also
Mm-hmm.
very good at then releasing them to somebody else to get to that final stage.
I can relate to that a lot. I, of course, am founder and CEO of my company, and I feel very similarly. I am really good at having a strategic vision. I'm good at seeing an opportunity, and I'm good at building it out 80 to 90% in terms of processes and functions. And then what I've learned to do is bring people on who can who excel in areas where I'm weak, who can who can carry something over goal lines, that sort of
Mhm.
thing. And so a lot of this really resonates with me really well.
Good, good. Yeah. I mean, and hopefully some of the people listening to this can learn you have to accept your nature. You know what I mean? Like, and so hearing you talk about what you're good at
Hmm.
and where you need to then turn it over to somebody else, it requires a lot of self-awareness. And I think too many people don't have that, and they say to themselves, well, I need to be CEO. And if you really care about the company and care about the people and care about the customers, you need to figure out, are you really the right person to keep being CEO? And I'm not necessarily asking this of you, Will. I don't know enough about your company to know, but my guess is in your case, yeah, you do need to be CEO because of the way your company is structured and the way you're branded. In my case, I didn't need to do that, and it would have been the death of the company if I had held in my mind, oh, Darrin's ego needs to be CEO. If I wasn't able to divorce my persona from the CEO title, I wouldn't have been successful. And you have to be able to do that in life, right? Whatever you're doing in
Yeah.
life, you have to really be self-aware enough to know what you're good at and what you're not good at.
So I'm also a wrestling coach, a high school wrestling coach, and I try to teach the guys who are wrestling and girls. Girls wrestling is one of the biggest. We don't have a girls team, but it's one of the fastest growing sports in the country. And So I try to tell the kids that, you shouldn't be aiming for being first place in every tournament. You shouldn't be aiming for being a state champion, or, all these things that wrestlers, especially at the higher levels, get really obsessed with, because those are very arbitrary titles, very arbitrary designations. And technically they don't really have control over those things. What they have control over is, okay, well, I've been practicing these moves. I want to go out into my match, whoever, it doesn't matter who I'm wrestling. I want to perform the moves that I've practiced as well as I possibly can. That is the kind of thing where mentally, if they can become self-aware enough that that is what they truly care about, then they're going to win the greatest number of matches that they're capable of. If they go out there thinking, oh, I want to be first, or this other guy I'm wrestling, he was a state champion before and I wasn't, then they're going to perform less well. I think it's very similar in business, where if you are not self-aware and you're really concerned with, okay, I need to make VP this year, I need to be the CEO, regardless of what that means for the company, I think it's going to hurt performance.
Yep.
So how did you become self-aware? Like, was that something, have you always been a self-aware person?
Wow, that's a hard thing. I guess I'll say I think I have.
Yeah. We asked the hard questions. Yeah, we asked the hard questions here.
To know that I was self-aware. I think I've been relatively self-aware, meaning, I'm now 52. I'm way more self-aware now than I was, say, at 30. But I do know that, even in high school. So in high school, I thought I was on track to be a premier heavy metal guitarist. I thought that was going to be my career.
Okay.
But I was self-aware enough to know that there were aspects of that didn't fit my personality. The constant being on the road in particular. And so I started asking myself, well, what within the music industry would be better for me? And I never actually pursued it, but I know I was really thinking that more the production side probably would have been a better career for me. And then I got turned on to physics and went down that path.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm kind of thinking out loud and saying, I do think I've been a fairly self-aware person. And for the most part, if I think about other people that I would designate as self-aware, they've either always been that way, or sadly, they've had some trauma that has forced them. The people who are unself-aware have always been blithely unaware of their own. They can't even get out of their own way. And I think they've always been that way. So I don't know. Nature, nurture, and how much can you change? That's a different podcast.
Well, we do try to ask the tough questions here, but we should move on to something you mentioned about making mistakes when you try to control things. What, just in general, can you think back to any memorable mistakes you made, anything you regret, or do you not think of mistakes that way?
I really don't. In life, I can point to a couple mistakes that I've made. At Maponics, I'm not a fatalist. I'm not one who says everything happens for a reason and just let the universe control everything. I'm not that at all. But I do think that a lot of the choices and decisions I made at Maponics either turned out to be good, or we learned enough from them that I don't think of them as mistakes. The things that come to mind are like little dumb things. Like I remember in one meeting, we had just lost money for like the second month in a row. This was in the early days, and I was scared. I was angry, and we had a little management meeting, and I think the F word slipped out. I tried always to never swear, and I saw people react. And so this is a stupid thing, what I'm about to say. So I proceeded to just swear for the next half hour, thinking that that would somehow spark people to work harder or somehow do something different. It was dumb of me on so many levels. These people were already working so hard. They didn't want the company to fail. They were doing their best. Some things are out of your control. Some things were my own fault for maybe not setting the right direction or not being clear about what I expected. But sitting there swearing at people, that was stupid. So things like that. But in terms of major business decisions, I can't really remember anything that I would consider to be a mistake, because I think everything that didn't turn out the way I hoped still had big learnings that came from them.
It's interesting that you still remember that meeting early on where you got frustrated, and it sounds to me like you swore and you saw that elicited some reaction, and you really wanted them to be doing, you wanted a reaction, and you kind of just kept on with it, and then you felt some regret over it, or you did, because even these 20 years later, but that essentially that would have been 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, call it 14, 15, 16 years ago, but yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it's funny how things like that stick with you. And I'm sure if I'll share something on a personal level. So I remember with one of my daughters, she was a vocal child, and you knew when she was upset, and you knew when she was happy, and she was always kind of flitting around. And I remember we were out to dinner one night with my in-laws, and like this is again, like, if you were to ask me what were some of the biggest mistakes you made as a parent, like, this night, she was like 5 or something. I was just trying to keep her near the table. So I simply just was holding her hand. Normally, if you're holding a child, I don't know, you're holding a child's hand, it's kind of loose. You can keep a good grip, right? While still being kind of loose. I locked my hand in a position. Well, she's a little kid. She's not used to that. She tries to flit away, and it doesn't move, because I had decided I'm going to just keep her in place. And she twisted her arm, and it really hurt her. And I know it really hurt her. And I instantly was like, oh my God, I just hurt my child. Not by trying to hurt them, but by trying to just keep them in place. And to this day, it's one of those things that I'm just like, why? It wasn't broken. It wasn't strained.
Yeah.
It wasn't, the next day she didn't even remember it. But to me, that was a failure as a dad, because it was more about me wanting my child to behave than me being okay with the fact that my kid was just being a kid.
Yeah. It's really interesting on a couple levels. One reason it's interesting to me is that you highlighted how when you tried to control things too much at Maponics, that was a mistake. And then, so it's interesting. I think that, I think probably a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah. And I think I'm actually, based on other people I've been around, I really don't try to control other people. I do try to control myself. And I have a lot of mechanisms and a lot of things that I try to, everything from willpower to structures that keep me on a path towards a particular goal. But the reason that a lot of these things stick out for me is because it's totally against my nature. I believe
Yeah.
I'm not somebody who tries to control others. And whenever I do, it ends badly. And so now, you know, full on, 52-year-old guy, uh, I'm much better about just the people around me communicating what I expect or what I want from the situation and letting them make their decisions. And if their decisions don't fit with me, okay, that's fine. It just means maybe the endeavor that we're about to undertake isn't going to work out, but trying to control people never works, at least for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've talked about mistakes. Let's talk for a moment about some good decisions that you made, and I'll go first. So when I think of good decisions that I made early on as CEO, one of the decisions was just picking the right horse. I could have, I have a marketing agency. I could have chosen to be a social media marketer. I could have chosen to only do search engine optimization, but instead I chose to do paid Google ads. And I did it essentially when Google was really growing, and Google's still growing, but which just illustrates why that was a good focus, because I was one of the very earliest Google partners. And what a lot of people don't realize in business is that's why strategy is so important. You could be all things to all people, and that's difficult. There's a lot of even if you're great at being all things to all people, you're going to end up having to do a lot of work. If you're just pick one thing, you pick the right one thing, then that's a good decision. So even though that's kind of, I'm not bragging when I say, frankly, I'm trying to highlight how it's like one simple thing I did, and then that turned into a lot of really good results. What's something that you think of when you think of some good decisions that you've made as CEO or as founder?
Well, I mentioned one, the decision to go down that path of digitizing neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Um, it could have ended up being a bad decision.
Yeah.
Um, it could have squandered a bunch of resources, and maybe that other product that we were entertaining at the same time that I alluded to, maybe that would have been the right path.
Yeah.
So we all want to think that our decisions that turn out good are because of how smart we are, and our decisions that turn out bad are because of all those screwed up people out there. You know, it didn't fail because of me, it failed because of them. But we have to own both, right? You have to own, or either own both or don't own both, but you can't mix and match. So in terms of, that was definitely a good decision, and of course replacing myself as CEO. Let me see if I can come up with another one that might be more general to people who are trying to be a leader at a company. The general practice of hiring the right people cannot be understated, cannot be overstated. It is so critical. And I'm thinking of some hires. Of course, I'm glossing over the hires that didn't work out, right? But a few hires that made such a difference. Um, and it comes back to that theme that I've been going on, which is getting something to that 80% mark and then having the right person to take it to the next level. And so early on the technical side, and early on when you're starting a company, you're doing everything, right?
Yeah.
The first area that I gave up was the technical realm.
Hmm.
And that person that I brought in to take that over was better than me, and took, for what the company was at that point, took it from 80% to 90, 95%. When the company changed, we needed somebody else to take it to the new 100%. but I did a similar thing on the sales front. Right around the time that we developed the neighborhood boundaries, we brought in a gentleman who ended up being the head of sales, and I felt completely comfortable. Again, an ethical person who was super good at getting deals done and getting to decision makers, but ethically. And so when you think about hiring somebody, it's easy to focus on talent. It's harder to focus on ethics because we
Hmm.
don't have a lot of rubrics for testing ethics.
Yeah.
You know, you can go on a sales call with somebody, but they can hide what they're doing when you're not around. Um, Programming, well, somebody can just program. And so you can look at the program. It works great. They're fast at programming. They make a bunch of notes and it's clear and other people can edit, blah, blah, blah. But are they going to tell you the truth when they're behind schedule? Or are they
Right.
going to blow smoke up your butt and then be late anyway?
Yeah.
Are they going to use coercive tactics with customers? Those kind of things, I guess I will say, in the spirit of your question, I generally made good decisions around hiring people with good ethics. And I think Maponics was a company that, not that we didn't make mistakes, but I think our customers and our employees would have said, you know what? This company wants to do not just the right things, but wants to do things right and wants to do things in a way that we all can feel good about at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think setting that tone for the company was a good decision.
That's interesting. So you set the tone and you emphasized that as a part of the hiring process to a certain degree. Did you write a company culture, or was it more just something that was, yeah, permeated things for other reasons?
We wrote a company culture. I think we called it the Maponics ethics document.
Okay.
Creative name, right? um, um, and it's funny. I don't think it's a direct correlation, but it was after that swearing tirade that I had.
Oh,
Um, so again, I'm not perfect, right? I don't think it's ethical to start artificially, swearing at your staff.
yeah.
But we did, and we did it as a team. Um, and there were some employees who didn't want to be part of it, so fine, you didn't have to. We were small then, I think maybe 30 people or
Okay.
something. And and I also remember some people saying like, "Why do we need to do this? This is a waste of time." And I stuck to it. I was like, "No, this is important." What we didn't do, honestly, as much as we should have, is regularly review it and revise it.
Yeah.
Did become part of the hiring documentation though. So staff were forced to read and sign that they have read that document before they became employees. I don't think we did that with outside contract staff, but for full time staff, we did. So you probably never signed that. Do
Probably
you remember
not,
seeing
but
it?
I do recall it, so long ago that it's a vague memory, but it does sound familiar.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I had totally forgotten about that till you asked the question. I'm sure I've got a copy somewhere, but um, now that I'm remembering it, man, what a great process that
Yeah.
was. I don't even remember the things that were in it, but it almost doesn't matter
Yeah.
because it was something we did as a company together, and it cemented the fact that we do care about good ethics. It
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah. So yeah, I would give you a lot of credit for going through that exercise, keeping it as a part of the company. I've done that myself, and even when we started with 4 or 5 people, maybe, at that point, I took through the time to go through that exercise, and it was immensely valuable. But I also relate to your comment about, it was a good thing to put it together and to do it. We probably could have done better to revise it or revisit it or kind of go through that exercise again, because that's how I feel right now is, it is something we go through with every new hire, but we could, there are long periods where, the whole company might not get a refresher.
Yeah. And it's easy, right? When you are an entrepreneur, there's a strong tendency to be like, there's a tendency to not revisit things.
Yeah.
Because you're always on to the next. You're always like, all right,
Right.
what's next? What's
That's
next?
done.
Where are we going next?
Yeah.
And so like, oh, we have an ethics document. Great. And you assume everybody has it in their head, that everybody practices it. And that's not always true. And especially as the company grows and you're bringing in new people, things do need to be revisited.
Yeah.
Yeah, great question, and thank you for asking it, because I smile thinking about that process and how that really was a good step in the evolution of Maponics.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've had an interesting experience as CEO, because you replaced yourself, you sold your company, you've talked about things where maybe you didn't want to be CEO. What can you speak a little bit more about how you were ready to move on? How do you know it was time and that the company could handle having a different CEO, or was that just an easy decision because you just knew the company was ready?
I didn't know the company was ready.
Okay.
I knew I was ready.
Okay.
I hoped the company was ready. And as I said, part of it was because when we soft shopped the company, feedback was that I was going to have to stick around. But part of it was I was burnt out. Part of the burnout was just, if your nature is an entrepreneur, you start to get frustrated if too much of your time is spent on managing systems or managing people, because you're not innovating. Other people in the company might be doing it, but you aren't. And for me, I wasn't doing any innovating.
Yeah.
And too much of my time was spent managing people and processes. So I knew I was ready. And if we hadn't sold the company, I would have liked to maybe move into more of an R&D role, or maybe a business development kind of a role that kind of blends what the market might be looking for into, feedback into the product development process. That would have been much more entrepreneurial for me.
Yeah.
But, as we said many times, it did lead to selling the company. I don't know. I guess that's the closest answer I have.
No, I think that's good. That's a self-awareness thing. I think that you were ready, and so therefore you had to get the company ready.
And to be clear, the company was only ready. My company was only ready because Dan Adams, the CEO who replaced me, was so great.
Yeah.
If he wasn't, no, the company wasn't ready to say goodbye to Darrin. Not because they loved Darrin, but because they were used to me. They knew what to expect. They knew how to do their jobs. Things weren't unknown.
Yeah.
You bring in a new CEO, I'm sure everybody had trepidation.
Yeah.
But Dan's vibe, his style, very similar to mine, just better. His abilities, very similar to mine, just better. And so for the staff, I think, and actually I don't just think, I know, because I spoke to several both during and, once in a while I run into somebody at a coffee shop. after the exit, and they've all said that because of that transition for Dan to replace me wasn't so bad for them. And so it turns out they were ready, but nobody knew that. And I
Right.
don't know how you would know that. If he had been a bad CEO in some way or another, we might have still been able to sell the company, but I'm not sure that the staff would have been. I don't think they would have stuck through. And
I
in
see.
this case, everybody stuck through. Nobody left during the acquisition process. We did have to. There were a couple people who were just not performing,
Yeah.
and we needed to take care of that before the exit. But nobody said, "Oh my gosh, you're selling the company. We're bolting." At least not that I'm aware of. So
Yeah. So I've got two more questions. You're located, and your business Maponics was located in White River Junction, Vermont, um, which is obviously, it's not New York City, it's not Silicon Valley.
no.
What's the role of location in creating and running a company?
Well, I'd like to give you a more strategic answer than you're going to get. I started the company in Vermont because that's where I lived.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine living in Silicon Valley, and therefore I couldn't imagine starting a company in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are certain spaces that you have to be in a certain location, biotech. I mean, actually, no, I shouldn't even say that, because there are several successful biotech companies right in that area around White River
Yeah.
Junction. So maybe a different way of answering you, besides just being flippant and saying I lived in Vermont, where I started in Vermont, is the tactics you need to employ in order to be successful in a rural place are obviously different than in suburbia and different than in an urban setting. We struggled in the early years getting good staff, not just because we couldn't pay, but because there's nothing around. What would spouses do?
Yeah.
Is there a job for them? And even a very simple thing like when you got exposed to Maponics, we were in White River Junction, and there was a little town. You could walk to a great coffee shop. There were some restaurants right there. Where I started Maponics was actually a town over called Norwich, Vermont. And there was none of that. So I remember some people who would come out for interviews, and they'd be like, "Oh, we love Vermont, hiking, biking, water, blah, blah, blah. Where do you guys go for lunch?" "Oh, wait, coffee is that little drip coffee thing over in the corner? Like, really?" And I remember on one level thinking like, "Oh my gosh, you prima donnas, like you need so much." And then when we moved to White River Junction, I'm like, "Oh no, I'm with you." I could never go back to not having a coffee shop nearby.
Yeah.
Like it was such a game changer, that little bit of difference. So I would definitely encourage you guys, like, don't start up in some abandoned barn because it's cute and people have to drive 20 minutes to get a good cup of coffee. No, don't be that rural.
Right.
But you can definitely start a company anywhere and get good staff, if you have just enough of the right mix of ambiance with amenities. And White River Junction is just an example. I'm not here to promote White River Junction, but it's great. It's got a good mix of everything, and I mean, lots of changes have gone with what was Maponics, but I know for the first couple of years, they were able to grow very quickly after they acquired Maponics, and the location was not a hurdle at all.
Okay. So it's interesting though, because it is a center for the mapping ecosystem because of a couple companies. So did that inspire you in some way? Or, I mean, you must have been thinking about that proximity. So on the one hand, it isn't I was kind of flippant too about, it's not Silicon Valley, it's not New York, but it is actually kind of a center of that GIS system type mapping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's so I had worked for one of those companies, which is actually where I had met Dan Adams. And so he was still working for that company when he came over. So yes, the proximity to people with experience in the space
Yeah.
absolutely made a difference. I didn't do that consciously. Don't get me,
Yeah.
that's where I live. So that's where I was going to start it.
Yeah.
But was it beneficial that there were, I don't even want to call it an ecosystem because it was too small to call it that. There was some type of ectoplasm of talent related to GIS and mapping that we were able to draw on. And some of our initial employees had worked for one of those other companies, but not as many as you might think.
Yeah.
I would say maybe 10 to 15%.
Interesting.
It wasn't that much, but it was enough. Without those 10 or 15%, probably a bunch of others wouldn't have been able to learn as quickly, and the company wouldn't have grown as fast.
Yeah. So, so you exited several years back. What are you up to these days?
Pretty much retired, which is good.
Nice.
I mentioned earlier a little bit about angel investing. It's interesting. I don't really have the drive to start a full-on company again. After the exit, I played around with starting companies because I didn't know what else to do, right? And then I kind of, in that self-awareness thing, realized, well, hold on. There's other ways to scratch that itch. And so investing in startups takes some of my time, but honestly, most of my time, I'm trying to become a highly ranked masters athlete in Olympic weightlifting, shot put, discus, and hammer throw. So most of my time is spent training.
That's fascinating. So what is a master's? What is that a designation, a master's?
Master's age group.
I think. So
Yeah.
So what's the age bracket?
It depends on the sport, but most of those are 5-year increments.
Okay.
Yeah, 5-year increments of age.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so we should look for you in competition at some point.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, nobody cares about the masters at my age, in the sense that you're not going to see any of us on TV.
You're talking to a guy who focuses on high school wrestling, so I'm very familiar with underappreciated sports.
Right. And like, the Olympics, wrestling's big. Olympic weightlifting, big. But those are the, in this case, guys who are, between 25 and 35. They're at the peak of their abilities. But it doesn't make it any less fun, and it doesn't change the drive. Like you were saying earlier with wrestling, where when you get out to compete, if you're thinking too much about your ranking or too much about your win versus losses, you're gonna trip on yourself. You need to think about, where am I in my practice, my abilities? How do I execute the best I can execute? In your case, with wrestling, you have a direct opponent that you obviously can't predict and control. In my case, I have opponents who have their own throws to do, their own lifts that they're trying to make. I can't control if they make them or not. I can only control what I do, and hope that over time my ability continues to improve and my ranking continues to improve.
Yeah. I think that's fascinating. I think it's great that you get to focus on that. So I want to thank you again for being here on Road to CEO. This has been a great episode. And I will be looking for you on the Masters circuit. I'd like to I'm not sure. I'm sure, even though you say it's not on TV, I'm sure it's on YouTube. So,
yeah, there's some stuff on YouTube, and you can always go on to USA Weightlifting and look up rankings and look up Darrin Clement, and you can go on Masters track. I think it's called Masters Track and Field, which keeps all those rankings. Please don't send me emails. I don't want to hear how much hope you have for me. I don't need all that, but you can silently cheer me on, and I'd appreciate it.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, thanks again for coming.
Yeah, thank you. This has been fun, Will.